Imagine coming home to find strangers dismantling your bedroom, this sacred space where you've kept 42 years of memories. Then, imagine your own son's wife casually telling you they're renovating before they move in. But the true horror comes the next morning, when police officers arrive at your door with a restraining order, against you. At 68, Margaret Hale never thought she'd be fighting for her home, her dignity, and her relationship with her only son. But when betrayal strikes from within her own family, she discovers a mysterious envelope left by her late husband with instructions: open only if they call you an intruder. What secret has been buried for decades? And why is her granddaughter leaving frightened voicemails in the middle of the night? Follow this heart-wrenching journey of an elderly woman's fight against those who would erase her from her own life. Follow our channel for more emotional true stories that will leave you questioning everything about family loyalty. Like, comment, and share where you're watching from, and let us know if you've ever discovered that the people closest to you weren't who you thought they were. I arrived home early that afternoon, the scent of autumn still clinging to my cardigan. It had been raining all morning in Scranton, that fine, misty kind that seeps right through your clothes without asking permission. My arthritis was acting up something awful, and all I wanted was the comfort of my bedroom, my quilt, and maybe a cup of Earl Grey. 42 years in this house, 42 years of memories soaked into every floorboard. Frank and I bought it when Andrew was just learning to crawl. I remember how Frank would carry me over that doorstep every anniversary, even when his back started giving him trouble. Tradition matters, Maggie, he'd say with that crooked smile of his. Frank's been gone 5 years now. Sometimes I still reach for him in my sleep. I was fumbling with my house key when I first heard it, the unmistakable sound of a hammer pounding against wood. Not the gentle, rhythmic tapping of someone hanging a picture frame, but the violent, deliberate strikes of demolition. My heart quickened as I pushed open the front door. "Hello," I called out, my voice smaller than I intended. No answer, just more hammering from upstairs. And voices, male voices I didn't recognize. I clutched my purse tighter and made my way up the stairs. Each step a decision, each creak of the wood beneath my feet a warning. The hallway seemed longer than usual, stretched out like in one of those nightmares where you can't quite reach the door. When I turned the corner, I saw them, two burly men in paint-splattered overalls, sawdust in their hair, tearing out the doorframe to my bedroom. My sanctuary? The only place in this house where I could still feel Frank beside me. One of them was dismantling my bedside table, the cherry wood one Frank had made for our 25th anniversary. The other was rolling up the Persian rug that had been my mother's wedding gift to us. "What are you doing?" I managed to say, though my voice sounded as if it belonged to someone else. "That's my room. My things." That's when Clara appeared behind them, my son's wife of 12 years. She was wearing one of those expensive yoga outfits that cost more than my weekly grocery bill and holding a glass of something that definitely wasn't water. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Margaret, you're home early," she said, as if I needed permission to return to my own house. "We're just making some renovations. Before we move in, move in." The words felt like pebbles in my mouth. "Move in where, Clara?" She gestured vaguely toward my bedroom where I could now see a fresh coat of honey-colored paint on the far wall. My wedding photo had been taken down. In its place was a framed ultrasound image. "We need the space, Margaret," Clara said, tapping away at her phone. "With the baby coming and Andrew's promotion keeping him so busy in the city, it just makes sense for us to be here full-time. You know how expensive childcare is these days." One of the workers emerged from my room carrying my dresser drawer, the one where I kept Frank's letters, his reading glasses, the watch that stopped the moment his heart did. "Where am I supposed to sleep?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Clara glanced up from her phone, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "We're still deciding. Maybe the basement? We could fix it up real nice for you." She turned to the worker. "Pete, be careful with that. We're keeping the frame but replacing the mattress." My mattress? The one where Frank and I had whispered our dreams to each other for decades. The one where I'd nursed Andrew through chickenpox and heartbreaks. The one where Frank had held my hand for the last time. "You can't just," I began, but Clara had already turned away, directing the workers to remove the curtains next. I stood there, invisible in my own home, watching strangers dismantle my life piece by piece. A lifetime of memories being hauled away like trash on collection day. That night, I slept on the living room couch, my body curled up tight as if trying to take up as little space as possible. The hammering had stopped, but the sound echoed in my head like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't quite name. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the unfamiliar creaks of my home as if the house itself was restless with the changes. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard voices upstairs, Clara and someone else, but I was too exhausted to investigate. Dawn broke with unusual harshness the next morning. Sunlight slanting through windows whose curtains had been removed. My back ached from the couch, and for a moment, I couldn't remember why I wasn't in my bed. Then it all came flooding back: the workers, Clara's smile, my things being carried away. I was in the kitchen making coffee, trying to figure out what to do, when I heard the sharp, authoritative knock at the front door. 3 rapid strikes that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. Clara came racing down the stairs, her face drained of color, hair still tousled from sleep. Gone was yesterday's cool composure. Her eyes were wide with something that looked almost like fear. "Why is the police knocking at our door?" She hissed at me as if I had somehow summoned them. Before I could answer, there was another knock, louder this time. And when I opened the door, 2 officers stood on my porch, their expressions grim. "Mrs. Margaret Hale," the taller one asked, looking down at a document in his hand. "Yes, that's me," I replied, suddenly aware of how small my voice sounded. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you about a complaint that's been filed." Behind me, I heard Clara's sharp intake of breath. When I turned to look at her, the fear in her eyes had been replaced by something else, something calculated and cold that made my blood run cold. I didn't know it then, but my world was about to collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. And the only warning I had was the sound of a hammer the day before, dismantling the life I thought was mine to keep. "Mrs. Hale, I'm Officer Collins, and this is Officer Ramirez. We're here about a restraining order filed against you." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. A restraining order against me in my own home of 4 decades. Officer Collins, mid-40s, with tired eyes that had seen too much, held out an official-looking document. The morning sun caught the Scranton Police Department badge on his chest, making it gleam with cold authority. I stared at the paper, not wanting to touch it, as if accepting it would make this nightmare real. "There must be some mistake," I whispered, my voice tissue paper. Officer Ramirez shook his head. He was younger, maybe 30, with a closely trimmed beard and eyes that couldn't quite meet mine. "No mistake, ma'am. The paperwork's been processed and signed by Judge Harmon this morning." My fingers trembled as I finally took the document. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but certain phrases jumped out with terrible clarity. ... Threat to minor child Lily Hale, age 8. ... Double quotes. Verbal intimidation ... Double quotes ... To remain at minimum 500 feet from residence ... My granddaughter's name. My precious Lily, who I'd helped raise since she was born, who still crawled into my lap for stories about the olden days. This says I threatened my granddaughter. My voice broke on the last word. "I would never, Mom." I turned to see my son Andrew standing in the hallway. He'd aged 10 years, overnight hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot, shoulders slumped beneath his wrinkled dress shirt. The same shirt I'd ironed for him 3 days ago while he told me about his promotion at the insurance company. "Andrew, tell them this is crazy," I pleaded. "Tell them I would never hurt Lily." But my son, my only child, whom I'd carried inside me for 9 months and in my heart for 68 years, couldn't look me in the eye. "Mom, ... It's better if you go. Just for a few days. Until things calm down." "Calm down. You're throwing me out of my own house." My voice rose with each word, panic spreading through my chest like wildfire. "The house your father and I bought, the house where you took your first steps, where we celebrated every Christmas, every birthday." Clara appeared beside Andrew, her arms sliding around his waist possessively. Gone was yesterday's yoga outfit, replaced by a crisp button-down blouse and slacks dressed for battle. She looked at me with something between pity and triumph. "Margaret, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said softly, but loud enough for the officers to hear. "We're concerned about your ... episodes. The doctor said this might happen, with your age and everything." "Episodes? What episodes? Andrew, what is she talking about?" I looked desperately at my son, searching for the boy who once ran to me with scraped knees and broken toys for me to fix. Officer Collins cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need you to gather some essentials and vacate the premises. The order specifies you need to be at least 500 feet from the property and from the minor child." "For how long?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The hearing is set for 2 weeks from today," Officer Ramirez said, almost apologetically. "The judge will make a determination then." 2 weeks. 2 weeks without my home, my belongings, my granddaughter. "Can I at least pack properly?" I asked, straightening my spine, determined not to break down in front of these strangers. Of course, ma'am, Officer Collins nodded. I'll need to accompany you upstairs. My bedroom, what was left of it, felt like a foreign country. The honey-colored paint was dry now, the crib fully assembled in the corner. A mobile of little stars and moons hung above it, twirling gently in the draft from the window. My wedding photo was nowhere to be seen. With shaking hands, I stuffed clothes into a plastic grocery bag. The nice suitcase was in the attic, and I couldn't bear to ask if I could get it. Underwear, 2 blouses, my blood pressure medication, the small photo album I kept in my nightstand. That's when I saw it, a manila envelope on my dresser, the only item they hadn't moved. I recognized Frank's handwriting immediately. Those careful, measured letters that always leaned slightly to the right, as dependable as the man himself. Across the front, in faded blue ink, were the words, "Open only if they call you an intruder." My breath caught. Frank had been gone 5 years, but here he was, somehow anticipating this moment. Had he known? Had he suspected? I slipped the envelope into my bag before Officer Collins could see it, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Downstairs, Andrew stood by the door, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, a posture he'd had since childhood whenever he felt guilty about something. "Mom, I'll call you later," he said, still not meeting my eyes. "It's just, Lily's been having nightmares, saying you were yelling at her, that you scared her, ... double quotes. I started, but Clara cut me off. She woke up screaming last night, Margaret. She's terrified of you." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Lily, afraid of me. The same child who'd fallen asleep in my arms just last Sunday while I read her Charlotte's Web. As Officer Collins escorted me to the door, I caught a glimpse of movement upstairs. Standing at the top of the stairs was a man tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and a face I recognized all too well. Patrick, Clara's brother, who'd shown up at Frank's funeral despite never having met him. The same Patrick who'd insisted on fixing our fence last month, spending hours taking measurements of the property. Our eyes met and he didn't look away. Instead, a small smile played at the corners of his mouth, not a friendly smile, but the satisfied look of a chess player who'd just captured his opponent's queen. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The front door closed behind me with a terrible finality. Officer Collins led me to the gate, his hand never quite touching my elbow but hovering there, making sure I left. "Do you have somewhere to go, Mrs. Hale?" he asked, a flicker of genuine concern crossing his face. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The truth was, I had nowhere. My sister lived in Arizona. My few friends were elderly like me, with no spare rooms or strength to handle a crisis like this. As I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my grocery bag of hastily packed belongings, the autumn wind cut through my cardigan. Behind me, Clara pulled the curtain closed, shutting me out of my own life. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about a bedroom renovation or making space for a new baby. This was something far worse. This was theft not of things, but of belonging, of identity, of home. An end with morning came with no mercy at the Parkview Motel. The thin curtains did little to block the harsh sunlight that streamed through the windows, illuminating the room's every imperfection: water stains on the ceiling, cigarette burns on the carpet, a crack running down the bathroom door like a lightning bolt. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Patrick's smug face watching me leave my own home. I heard Lily's frightened voice on that voicemail. I felt the weight of Frank's mysterious photo in my hands. My back protested as I sat up and reached for my phone. Still no calls from Andrew. I'd left him 3 messages yesterday, each more desperate than the last. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 8:17 a.m. Checkout was at 11. I had nowhere to go. That's when I remembered Mary Callahan. Mary lived 4 houses down from Mina, retired nurse with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. We weren't exactly close friends, but we'd shared countless cups of tea over the years, traded recipes, watched each other's homes during vacations. She'd been the first to bring a casserole when Frank died. I found her number in my contacts and pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. "Margaret." Her voice was alert despite the early hour. "I was just about to call you. Susan next door said she saw police at your house yesterday." What in heaven's name is going on? 20 minutes later, I was sitting at Mary's kitchen table, the familiar scent of her cinnamon coffee filling the air. Her house was smaller than mine, but immaculately kept, with doilies on the armrests and family photos covering every surface. Her late husband Joe had been a firefighter. His medals hung proudly in a shadow box on the wall. Mary listened without interrupting as I told her everything: the workers in my bedroom, Clara's smug announcement, the restraining order, Lily's cryptic voicemail, the This photo from Frank. When I finished, Mary's face was pale, her coffee forgotten and cold. Margaret, she said slowly, this reminds me of what happened to Eleanor Ellison over on Birch Street last year. My stomach tightened. What happened to Eleanor? Mary's eyes darkened. Her daughter-in-law falsified her signature on property transfer documents while Eleanor was in the hospital for hip surgery. By the time Eleanor realized what had happened, the house had already been remortgaged. The bank foreclosed 6 months later. Eleanor died in that awful nursing home out by the highway. She shook her head. The police said it was a civil matter. Never did a thing about it. My hands trembled around my mug. You think that's what's happening to me? They're trying to take my house? I don't know, Mary said carefully. But that restraining order is mighty convenient, isn't it? Gets you out of the way, gives them access to all your papers, your mail, ... double quotes. She paused. Have you signed anything recently? Any documents Andrew or Clara asked you to sign? I thought back. Nothing major, just Andrew had me sign some insurance forms last month. Said it was for their new baby, updating beneficiaries. Mary's frown deepened. Did you read them? All of them. A flush of embarrassment crept up my neck. I trust my son, Mary. I know you do. Honey? She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. But sometimes the people closest to us can surprise us in the worst ways, especially when money's involved. We sat in silence for a moment, the grandfather clock in her living room marking the seconds with solemn precision. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, pattering against the windows like impatient fingers. I need to see those papers, I said finally. Whatever it is Lily heard them fighting about. Mary nodded, a glint of determination in her eyes. Your house key still works, doesn't it? The restraining order keeps you 500 feet from the property, but it doesn't say anything about friends checking on the place, does it? That afternoon, while Andrew was at work and Clara had her weekly hair appointment at Sophisticate Salon downtown, Mary and I parked her ancient Buick a block away from my house. I waited in the car, heart pounding, while Mary walked casually up the street. A canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder as if she were simply returning borrowed Tupperware. The autumn rain had picked up, providing perfect cover as Mary disappeared around the side of my house. I knew exactly where she was going, the kitchen window with the faulty latch that Frank had always meant to fix but never got around to. The same window I'd used countless times when I locked myself out while gardening. 15 excruciating minutes passed. What if someone saw her? What if Patrick was there? What if the car door opened suddenly and Mary slid into the driver's seat, soaking wet and breathing hard? Drive, she said tersely, just around the corner. Now? I didn't ask questions until we were safely parked behind the abandoned Woolworths building, out of sight from the main road. What happened? Did you find anything? Mary reached into her tote bag with shaking hands and pulled out a torn piece of paper ragged along one edge as if it had been ripped in half. It was clearly part of an official document, with a notary seal visible in one corner. I could make out my name in the text, along with the words, hereby transfer ownership of the property located at 1423 Maple Avenue, ... double quotes. My blood ran cold. They're trying to steal my house. It gets worse, Mary said grimly. Clara came home early. I was in your office when I heard the front door. Had to hide in the hall closet until she went upstairs. But I heard her on the phone with someone, Patrick, I think. She said, the old lady's document is ready. Judge will sign tomorrow without a hearing since she's been deemed a threat. My hands clenched into fists. A threat? To my own granddaughter? That's absurd. It's convenient, Mary corrected. With a restraining order based on a threat to a child, they can push for an emergency competency hearing. If they convince a judge you're unstable, ... double quotes, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I stared down at the torn document, a terrible realization dawning. They're going to try to have me declared incompetent. Take control of everything, Mary nodded grimly. And they needed you out of the house to do it. But why now? After all these years. The baby, Mary said softly, they need more space, more money. And your house, sitting on that big corner lot, is worth a fortune now that they're building those luxury townhomes across the park. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the rain. I thought of Patrick's smirk as I was escorted from my home, of Clara's cold eyes, of my son, unable to look at me. How long had they been planning this? How many confused moments had Clara been documenting, exaggerating, inventing? How many times had Andrew dismissed my concerns as just mom being dramatic? We need to go back, I said suddenly. I need the rest of that document. Mary's eyes widened. Margaret, you can't. The restraining order. I know the risks. I cut her off, a new determination hardening in my chest. But Frank's trying to tell me something from beyond the grave, and I need to find out what it is. Besides, I added, a ghost of a smile crossing my lips. What are they going to do to me that they haven't already done? Throw me in jail? At least I'd have a roof over my head. Mary insisted I stay with her that night. She set me up in her spare bedroom, which smelled of lavender sachets and old paperbacks. The twin bed had a handmade quilt from her mother, each square telling a story I was too exhausted to appreciate. My mind was too full of torn documents and betrayal. I couldn't sleep. The digital clock on the nightstand ticked past midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2. The rain had stopped, but occasional cars splashed through puddles outside, their headlights casting long shadows across the unfamiliar ceiling. I thought about Frank, about the photo, about the mysterious Mike who stood beside him, grinning at the camera over a string of trout. At 3:17 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and slipped out to Mary's back porch with my phone and Frank's envelope. The night air was cool against my face, heavy with the scent of wet earth and Mary's late-blooming roses. A nearly full moon had emerged from behind the clouds, casting silver light across the yard. In the distance, I could hear the mournful whistle of a freight train passing through Scranton. I spread the contents of the envelope on the small wicker table. The photograph of Frank and Mike, the cryptic note. If they ever call you a liar, show them the truth. What truth? What was Frank trying to tell me? I studied the photo more carefully. Frank, young and vibrant, his arm thrown casually around Mike's shoulders. They were standing in front of a rustic cabin, holding that string of fish. Bros, no. Frank was an only child. Cousins, perhaps. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. Mike's eyes, even in the faded photograph, they were striking a light color, maybe blue or green. And there was something familiar about them, about the shape of his face, the set of his jaw. My breath caught in my throat as realization dawned. It couldn't be, could it? I fumbled with my phone, pulling up a photo of Andrew from last Christmas. I held it next to the old photograph, comparing the features in the moonlight. Andrew had my coloring, my dark hair, but his eyes, his jawline, the slight cleft in his chin, those weren't Frank's features. They were Mike's. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. Memories came flooding back, uninvited and painful. Summer, 1979. Frank and I had been going through a rough patch. He'd lost his job at the steel mill, started drinking too much. We'd had a terrible fight, and he'd stormed out, gone to stay with his cousin in Philadelphia. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from him. I was lonely, devastated, convinced my marriage was over. And Michael O'Reilly Mike had been there. New to town, working on the construction crew building the mall. He'd come to fix our leaky roof, stayed for iced tea, then dinner, then it was just once. One mistake. One night of weakness and loneliness. When Frank came back, sober and apologetic, I'd pushed the memory away, buried it deep. When I discovered I was pregnant 3 months later, I did the math and told myself it had to be Frank's. I convinced myself of this so thoroughly that I almost believed it. But Frank must have known. Maybe he'd always known. I thought about how he'd looked at Andrew sometimes, with a strange, sad expression I could never quite read. How he'd been a good, father-loving patient, present but would occasionally withdraw into himself for days, especially around Andrew's birthday. And on his deathbed, his last coherent words to me, never tell Andrew what he doesn't need to know. The tears came then, for the first time since this nightmare began. Not the angry, desperate tears from the motel room, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from the very core of me. I cried for Frank, who had raised another man's child as his own, who had carried that knowledge in silence for decades. I cried for Andrew, who might never know the truth about his parentage. I cried for myself, for the weight of secrets and the price of past mistakes. I don't know how long I sat there on Mary's porch, crying in the moonlight. But when the tears finally subsided, a terrible clarity had taken their place. Patrick Clara's brother, the man with the smug smile watching me leave my home, must have found out somehow. Perhaps he'd discovered old letters, or overheard Frank talking in his final days. And now he was using that knowledge. But why? What did my decades-old infidelity have to do with forcing me out of my home now? Then it hit me like a physical blow. The inheritance. The house was in Frank's name. According to his will, it would pass to me and then to Andrew upon my death. But if I were legally declared incompetent, or a danger to the family if Andrew were granted conservatorship over me, he would effectively control the property while I still lived. And Clara, with her expensive tastes and her brother's guidance, would be right there to help him make decisions. I thought about the housing development going up across from the park. Luxury townhomes starting at $450,000. My house, with its corner lot and established trees, was worth far more than I'd ever imagined when Frank and I bought it for $27,000 in 1976. They didn't want to just move into my bedroom. They wanted to cash in on my home, perhaps sell it to developers, and they needed me out of the way to do it. But they needed something more than a false accusation of threatening Lily. They needed something that would turn Andrew against me completely. Something that would make him believe I was unstable, dangerous, untrustworthy. And what could be more devastating than learning his mother had lied about his parentage for his entire life? I clutched the photograph in my trembling hands. Frank had known this day might come. He'd left me this evidence, this connection to a past I'd tried to forget. Not to punish me, but to arm me. If they call you a liar, show them the truth. The truth that Andrew wasn't Frank's biological son, but that Frank had chosen to be his father anyway. The truth that love isn't about blood, but about choice, day after day, year after year. As the first light of dawn began to streak the eastern sky, I made a decision. I wouldn't run from my past anymore. I wouldn't let them use my secrets against me. I would fight for my home, for Frank's memory, for the truth whatever it might cost me. The plan came together over Mary's kitchen table that evening. Andrew's social media, the one area where my son was consistent, showed he and Clara would be attending a charity fundraiser at the Scranton Country Club. The event started at 7 p.m. and typically ran past midnight. Patrick's truck hadn't been parked outside my house when Mary drove by earlier, which meant this might be my only chance. "This is insane, Margaret," Mary said, clutching her mug of chamomile tea. "If they catch you there, you'll be in jail before sunrise." I held up Frank's photo, my face set with determination. "I need evidence, Mary. Real evidence of what they're planning." I patted the pocket of my cardigan where my cell phone rested. "And I'm going to record everything I find." The digital clock on Mary's microwave read 10:27 p.m. when we parked 2 blocks away from my house. The neighborhood was quiet, most windows dark except for the blue flicker of late-night television. A light mist had settled over Scranton, wrapping the street lamps in halos and softening the edges of the world. "I'll wait exactly 30 minutes, Mary said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "If you're not back, I'm calling the police. And tell them that you helped a senior citizen violate a restraining order." I tried to smile, but my lips trembled. "Just wait, I'll be fine." I wasn't fine. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat as I crept through Mrs. Abernathy's backyard, past the Johnson's tool shed, and finally to the rear of my own property. The wet grass soaked through my sneakers, Frank's old Keds that I'd never been able to throw away. My arthritis flared with each step, sending sharp pains through my knees, but I pushed forward. The kitchen window, our entry point from yesterday, was now locked tight. Of course, they'd check after Mary's visit, but the basement window, hidden behind the hydrangea bushes I'd planted 20 years ago, had always been Frank's secret smoking spot. He'd deliberately left the lock broken so he could sneak cigarettes when I thought he'd quit. Some secrets serve us in unexpected ways. The window creaked as I pushed it open, the sound deafening in the night silence. I paused, listening for any reaction from inside. Nothing. With a grunt of effort that reminded me painfully of my age, I lowered myself into the darkness of my own basement. The familiar smell hit me first: laundry detergent, old books, the faint mustiness of a space half underground. I used the flashlight function on my phone, keeping the beam pointed downward to avoid any light showing through the windows. My husband's workbench stood against the far wall, his tools still arranged in the same meticulous order he'd maintained in life. Frank, ever organized, even in absence. I made my way up the basement stairs, testing each one carefully to avoid the third step, always a creaker at the top. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any movement in the kitchen beyond. Silence. Slowly, I turned the knob and eased the door open just enough to slip through. The kitchen had already been transformed. Clara's fancy copper pots hung where my well-worn cast iron used to be. A gleaming espresso machine I'd never seen before dominated the counter. Family photos. My family photos had been removed from the refrigerator, replaced with ultrasound images and a vacation snapshot of Andrew and Clara in the Bahamas. I was being erased, piece by piece. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I moved through the dining room toward the stairs, keeping close to the wall where the floorboards were less likely to protest. Each step felt like navigating a minefield of memory. Here was where Andrew had toppled the Christmas tree when he was 7. There was the doorframe where we'd marked his height each birthday. The corner where Frank had proposed for a second time on our 25th anniversary, getting down on one knee despite his bad back. As I reached the top of the stairs, voices drifted from my bedroom, the room that was no longer mine. Tomorrow at the latest, Patrick's voice, smug and assured. Are you sure about this, Pat? What if she contests it? Clara sounded nervous, her usual confidence wavering. I froze, then carefully pulled out my phone and opened the recording app, heart hammering. I inched closer to the partially open door. Contest it how? She's been legally removed from the property, declared a threat to a minor. By the time she figures out what's happening, it'll be done. Patrick's voice hardened. The judge owes me. Clara? The paperwork will be processed without a hearing. Emergency circumstances, and Andrew won't know. Clara again, her voice dropping so low I had to strain to hear. Your husband signs whatever you put in front of him. You said so yourself. A bitter taste filled my mouth. My son, the little boy who'd once questioned everything, now blindly signing documents that would steal his mother's home. I leaned closer, desperate to hear more, and my elbow brushed against the hallway table. A small ceramic dish, the one Lily had made for me in art class, last year teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then crashed to the floor. What was that? Patrick's voice sharpened. Probably just the cat, Clara said, but footsteps were already moving toward the door. I turned and fled, abandoning stealth for speed, nearly tumbling down the stairs in my haste. Behind me, Patrick shouted, Hey, stop! I scrambled through the kitchen, knocking over one of Clara's precious copper pots in my panic. The basement door was still open, my escape route clear, but as I reached it, the front door opened and a shaft of light cut through the living room. Margaret, Clara's voice, shrill with alarm. I didn't look back. I threw myself down the basement stairs, ignoring the screaming protest from my knees, and lunged for the open window. Outside, the mist had thickened to a steady rain, making the grass slippery beneath my hands as I pulled myself through the narrow opening. Footsteps pounded down the basement stairs behind me. I rolled fully outside, mud soaking into my clothes, and scrambled to my feet. My phone, where was my phone? Had I dropped it in the panic? No time to look. I ran, hunched low, through the wet gardens, past the hedges, aiming for the shadows between streetlights. Behind me, I heard the basement window scrape open wider, Patrick's cursing as he struggled to fit his larger frame through the opening. Grandma, a small, frightened voice floated from above Lily's window, now open, her tiny face peering out into the rainy night. Grandma, is that you? My heart nearly shattered at the sound. I wanted so badly to stop, to call back to her, to tell her everything would be okay. But Patrick was nearly through the window now, and I could see Clara's silhouette moving through the house, turning on lights, perhaps calling the police. Leave my grandma alone. Lily's voice rose in the darkness, brave and clear despite its trembling. I ran faster than I thought possible at my age, powered by fear and heartbreak and the sound of my granddaughter defending me against her own parents. I didn't stop until I reached Mary's car, flinging myself into the passenger seat with rain streaming down my face, or were they tears? I couldn't tell anymore. Doctor, I gasped. They saw me. They know. As Mary pulled away from the curb, I reached into my pocket and felt a surge of triumph mixed with terror. My phone was there, the recording app still running, capturing every ragged breath, every thundering heartbeat of my escape. I had what I needed now. I had proof. The Lackawanna County courthouse loomed against the morning sky like something from another century, all imposing stone and solemn purpose. The steps leading to its massive oak doors seemed to multiply as I approached, each one a mountain to my tired legs. I'd barely slept. The recording from last night played over and over in my mind, each word a nail in the coffin of what I'd once believed about my family. The night had been endless at Mary's house. We'd huddled over my phone, listening to Patrick's voice, plotting with Clara, analyzing every word like detectives in one of those crime shows Andrew used to watch. Mary had wanted to call the police immediately, but what proof did we really have? A partial conversation that could be explained away as a misunderstanding. A restraining order still stood against EIH was the one who had broken the law. No, I'd told her, clutching my phone and Frank's envelope. We do this right. We do this in court. Now, at 8:42 a.m., I stood alone at the base of those courthouse steps, dressed in the only decent outfit I had, with Mia navy blue dress I'd worn to church last Sunday, now slightly wrinkled from being stuffed in a plastic bag. My hair was hastily pinned up, my hands bare of jewelry except for my wedding band. I'd left Mary at home, despite her protests. This was my battle. Inside, the courthouse bustled with morning activity, lawyers in sharp suits consulting in hushed tones. Clerks shuffling papers, ordinary people like me waiting for their moment before justice. The air smelled of floor polish and anxiety. I found courtroom 3 where my hearing was scheduled. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy door, the hinges groaning as if announcing my arrival. The room was smaller than I expected, intimate almost, with dark wood paneling and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in a sickly pallor. My heart stumbled when I saw them Mandrew, Clara, and Patrick sitting together on the plaintiff's side, heads bent close in conversation. Andrew looked exhausted, deep circles under his eyes, his normally neat hair disheveled. Clara was immaculate as always, a cream-colored blouse setting off her salon tan, not a hair out of place. Patrick sat slightly apart, checking his watch impatiently, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. They didn't notice me at first, giving me a moment to settle my racing heart. I slipped into a seat on the opposite side, clutching my plastic folder containing the recording, Frank's envelope, and the torn document Mary had recovered. When Andrew finally looked up and saw me, his expression wasn't what I expected. Not anger, not disgust, just profound weariness, and something else doubt. For a flicker of a moment, our eyes connected across the room, mother and son. And I thought I glimpsed the little boy who used to run to my arms after falling off his bike. Then Clara's hand closed over his, and the moment passed. "All rise," the bailiff announced. And Judge Harriet Wellen entered the courtroom, a tall woman with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck, and her expression suggested she'd seen it all and wasn't impressed by any of it. Case number 47,392, temporary restraining order against Margaret Hale, the bailiff read out. This is the hearing to determine if the temporary order should be extended to a permanent status. Judge Wellen settled into her chair, adjusting her glasses. I've reviewed the petition filed by Mr. and Mrs. Hey, she began, her voice surprisingly gentle for someone with such a stern appearance. They allege that Mrs. Margaret Hale made threats against their minor child, Lily Hale, age 8, causing the child emotional distress and fear. Is that correct? Clara and Andrew's lawyer, slick-looking man with too much constituted, yes, Your Honor. And we have additional evidence that Mrs. Hale violated the temporary order just last night, breaking into the plaintiff's home. We'd like to add that to the record and request immediate Your Honor, I interrupted, standing on shaky legs. I'd like to present evidence of my own. Judge Wellen's eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Hale, do you have legal representation today? No, Your Honor, just the truth. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. The judge studied me for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Approach my knees. Nearly buckled as I walked forward, acutely aware of the 3 sets of eyes burning into my back. I handed the judge my phone with the recording queued up. Your Honor, last night I did enter my own home, the home I've owned for 42 years because I had reason to believe my son and his wife were attempting to fraudulently take possession of my property, possibly by having me declared incompetent. This recording proves their intention. Clara's gasp was audible behind me. The judge's expression remained neutral as she accepted my phone and the earbuds I offered. For what felt like an eternity, she listened, her eyes occasionally flicking to Patrick, then Clara, then back to the device. When she removed the earbuds, her expression had hardened. Mr. Sullivan, she addressed Clara and Andrew's lawyer. Are you aware of the content of this recording? The lawyer looked confused. No, Your Honor, this is the first. It's fake, Clara blurted out, rising from her seat. She could have manipulated anything. She's confused, Your Honor. She's been having episodes of paranoia, forgetting things, accusing us of be seated. Mrs. Hale, the judge said firmly, you'll have your turn. I withdrew the torn document from my folder. Your Honor, this was found in my house. It appears to be a property transfer document with my name on it, though I never signed such a thing. And I have reason to believe the restraining order was part of a plan to keep me away while they completed this fraud. Judge Wellen accepted the document, examining it closely. And this second envelope, my heart pounded. This was it, the moment Frank had prepared me for all those years ago. It contains evidence related to a family matter. Your Honor, one that I believe Patrick Stevens, Clara's brother, was using to manipulate my son into turning against me. Patrick suddenly stood, his face flushed. This is ridiculous. We're here about a restraining order, not some ancient family history. Sit down, Mr. Stevens, the judge snapped. Mrs. Hale, continue. I took a deep breath. There's one more piece of evidence. Your Honor, I pulled up Lily's voicemail on my phone and played it for the courtroom. The small, frightened voice of my granddaughter filled the space. Grandma, they're fighting about Daddy's paper. Uncle Patrick told them to hide it before you see it. I'm scared, Grandma. They're saying bad things about you. Andrew's head snapped up, his gaze locking with mine. He hadn't heard this before, I could see it. In the shock that transformed his face, the judge removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. In light of this evidence, I'm suspending the temporary restraining order effective immediately. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential fraud and elder abuse. Mr. Stevens, Mrs. Clara Hale, I suggest you remain available for questioning. Clara's perfectly composed facade crumbled. But the document proves she's unstable. Tell them, Andrew. Tell them what your mother did. Andrew stood slowly, looking more lost than I'd ever seen him. What document? He asked, his voice barely audible. What are you talking about, Clara? Patrick grabbed his sister's arm. Shut up, Clara, not here. But Clara was beyond reason now, her carefully constructed plan dissolving before her eyes. The DNA test. The one that proves you're not even Frank Hale's son. She lied to you your entire life. She's been lying to everyone. A terrible silence fell over the courtroom. I felt the weight of every eye upon me, but the only gaze that mattered was Andrew's, my son. My heart, staring at me with dawning comprehension and horror. Mom? The word was barely a whisper, a question, a plea. I opened Frank's envelope and withdrew the photograph of Frank and Mike, extending it toward Andrew with trembling fingers. Your father, Frankie, knew. He always knew. And he loved you anyway. Every day of his life. Andrew took the photo, studied it, recognition dawning slowly on his face. This man, he looks like ... like you. I finished softly. His name was Michael O'Reilly. It was one time, Andrew, a mistake when your father and I were separated. When I thought our marriage was over. But Frank came back, and when he learned I was pregnant, he chose to be your father. He chose you every single day. My son's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't you ever tell me? The question hung between us, heavy with decades of silence and secrets. The courtroom, the judge, Clara and Patrick Hall faded away until it was just mother and son. Truth finally laid bare. Because, I said gently, the man who raises you, who loves you, who teaches you to ride a bike and picks you up when you fall, that's your father. Frank made me promise never to tell you what you didn't need to know. Because love isn't about DNA, Andrew. It's about choice. And Frank chose you. Every single day. 3 months can change everything. The maple tree in my front yard had shed its leaves completely, leaving skeletal branches etched against the December sky. The first snow of winter had fallen overnight, covering Scranton in a blanket of pristine white that muffled sound and softened edges. I stood on the sidewalk outside my house again, legally and completely watching my breath form clouds in the cold air. The key felt heavy in my gloved hand, a small piece of metal that represented so much more than just entry. The investigation into Clara and Patrick's scheme had been swift and thorough. Judge Wellen, appalled by the recording and the forged documents, had personally referred the case to the district attorney. Patrick now faced charges of fraud and conspiracy. Clara had filed for divorce just 2 weeks after the hearing, disappearing to her sister's place in Philadelphia, leaving Andrew to process the wreckage of both his marriage and the revelation about his parentage. I hadn't seen my son in nearly a month. After the courthouse, we'd had a series of painful conversations in coffee shops. In Mary's living room, once in the park where I used to push him on the swings, each meeting laid bare another layer of hurt, another question, another memory now viewed through a different lens. Did he ever resent me? Andrew had asked during our last meeting, staring into his untouched coffee. Frank, Dad, did he ever regret raising someone else's child? I'd reached across the table then, covering his hand with mine. Your father kept every drawing you ever made him. He recorded your height on the kitchen doorframe every birthday. He wore that hideous tie you gave him when you were 9 to every important meeting for 20 years until it fell apart. My voice had broken. That's not what regret looks like, Andrew. Now, as I climbed the steps to my front porch, I noticed small changes. The brass knocker had been polished, the weathered welcome mat replaced with a new one, the porch swing repaired. Signs of care, of attention. The door opened before I could use my key. Andrew stood in the entryway, shadows under his eyes but a tentative smile on his face. You're early, he said softly. We're still setting up. Setting up. I stepped inside, removing my gloves, confused. The familiar scent of home embraced mealy mown polish and cinnamon. The subtle mustiness of old books, the faint echo of Frank's aftershave that somehow still lingered after all these years. But there were new smells, too: fresh paint, pine boughs, something baking. Lily's idea, Andrew explained, taking my coat. A welcome home party. My throat tightened with unexpected emotion. Andrew, you didn't have to, Grandma. The voice came from the top of the stairs, and then Lily was racing down, pigtails flying, wearing the Christmas sweater I'd knitted for her last year. She flung herself into my arms with such force that I nearly toppled over. You're back for real, Daddy said, forever this time. I held her tightly, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. That's right, sweetheart. Forever this time. Andrew led me through to the living room, his hand gentle on my elbow. I gasped at the transformation. My old furniture had been returned, arranged just as I liked it. Frank's reading chair sat in its spot by the window, my crocheted afghan draped over the sofa. The family photos were back on the mantel, including ones of Frank that Clara had removed. But there were new additions to a small Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, decorated with homemade ornaments. Garlands of pine and holly adorned the windows, and on the coffee table sat a framed photograph I'd never seen before. Frank holding newborn Andrew in the hospital, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took my breath away. Found it in the attic, Andrew said quietly, noticing where my gaze had landed. In a box of Dad's things. There was a letter with it. He hesitated, then added, he wrote it the day I was born. Said it was the happiest day of his life. The tears came then, hot and unexpected. I sank onto the sofa, overwhelmed by the evidence of Frank's love that had survived secrets, betrayal, and even death. Lily climbed onto the sofa beside me, her small hand slipping into mine. Daddy says Grandpa Frank was my grandpa because he chose to be, not because he had to be. That's even better, isn't it? Because he picked us from the mouths of children. Sometimes the purest wisdom. Andrew sat on my other side, the three of us together on the same sofa where we'd read stories, opened Christmas presents, weathered storms both literal and figurative for decades. I've been thinking a lot about what you said in court, Mom, about how being a parent is about choosing someone every day. His voice was thick with emotion. I understand that now, better than I ever did before. I squeezed his hand, words momentarily beyond me. I have made some decisions, he continued. I'm keeping the house in your name. It's your home, always has been, always will be. Lily and I have been staying in the guest room, if that's okay with you. We'd like to stay, just until I figure out next steps. He paused. But only if you want us here. Want you here, I echoed, looking from my son to my granddaughter. You two are all I want in the world. Lily jumped up suddenly. Oh, the cookies. She dashed to the kitchen, calling back, I made your favorite, with the jam in the middle, when she was gone. Andrew turned to me, his expression serious. There's something else, Mom, something I need to say. He took a deep breath. I'm sorry. For not seeing what Clara and Patrick were doing, for not believing in you. For I pressed my fingers to his lips, stopping the flow of words. No more apologies. No more looking back. I glanced at Frank's photo on the mantel. His kind eyes seemed to be watching over us still. Your father had a saying, forgiveness is the only way not to carry chains. Andrew's eyes widened in recognition. I remember, he used to say that whenever I'd fight with the neighbor kids, Frank understood something that took me much longer to learn. I said softly. Holding on to hurt only hurts the holder. My son nodded, blinking rapidly. Then, for the first time in what felt like years, he leaned over and hugged me, really hugged me, the way he used to as a boy. Before teenage awkwardness and adult distance had created invisible barriers between us. Later that evening, after hot chocolate and cookies, after Lily had shown me every drawing she'd made in my absence, after Andrew had gone to pick up dinner from our favorite Italian restaurant, I found myself alone in the master bedroom. My bedroom again. The honey-colored paint was gone, replaced with the soft blue I'd always loved. My quilt was back on the bed. My books lined the shelves. On the nightstand, in a new silver frame, sat the photograph of Frank and Michael O'Reilly, no longer hidden away in an envelope. No more secrets, no more shame. I opened the window a crack, letting in the crisp winter air. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, clear and bright in the still evening. The sound carried me back through the decades to my wedding day, to Andrew's christening, to Frank's funeral. Life moves in circles, I thought. We come back to where we started, but changed by the journey. I glanced at the photo once more, at Frank's young face filled with friendship and joy. You were right, I whispered to his memory. The truth did set us free. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft flakes drifting past my window like gentle messages from above. In the kitchen, I could hear Lily's laughter. The sound of Andrew unpacking takeout containers, the comfortable rhythm of family. I was home. Not just in this house, but in the truest sense of the word, surrounded by love that had weathered storms and secrets, and emerged stronger for the journey. And in the quiet of my heart, I could almost hear Frank's voice, warm and certain as ever. Welcome home, Maggie. Welcome home. Margaret's journey reminds us that sometimes the deepest wounds come from those we love most, but also that courage knows no age limit. When her world collapsed around her, she found strength she never knew she possessed. The strength to fight for her home, her dignity, and the truth that her late husband had protected for decades. What would you have done in Margaret's shoes? Would you have had the courage to return to a house where you were labeled an intruder? To face the son who doubted you? To expose secrets buried for a lifetime? Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Margaret's story is that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. Frank chose to be Andrew's father every single day, just as Margaret chose forgiveness over bitterness in the end. Our homes aren't just buildings of brick and wood, but vessels of memory and belonging that define who we are. When someone tries to erase your existence, fighting back isn't just about property, it's about preserving your very identity. If this story touched your heart, please consider following our channel for more powerful true stories that illuminate the hidden corners of human experience. Like, share, and tell us in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours? Have you ever discovered that a loved one was keeping a secret to protect you? Your stories matter to us. And together we create a community that understands that life's greatest challenges often lead to its most profound revelations.